McCarthyism struck mass terror throughout the 1950s due to the mass spread of propaganda. McCarthyism is also known as the Second Red Scare. Joseph McCarthy was a well-known senator from Wisconsin that helped influence the mass anti-communist crusades of the 1950s. His work became so prominent that it was nicknamed McCarthyism. This mass spread of anti-communist propaganda was not only seen in Wisconsin, but also extended into California with the Hollywood blacklist. 2 years after the beginning of the Cold War, the National Security Act was established. It led to the creation of the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, and the Central Intelligence Agency. These acts brought together the heads of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force as Joint Chiefs of Staff. The creation of the National Security Act showed America's growing fear in the spread of communism and the government's actions to protect their country from this looming threat. In 1950, Joseph McCarthy caught national attention when he proclaimed that he had a list of 205 known communists working in the State Department. Later that year, he gave another speech proclaiming that his earlier list of 205 was reduced to 57 individuals that were either affiliated or were card-carrying members of the Communist Party. McCarthy's announcement increased the growing fear of communist infiltration of the U.S. government. This image displays the first political cartoon that used the term McCarthyism, published by the Washington Post in 1950. The people pictured in the political cartoon are Senators Kenneth Wherry, Robert Taft, and Styles Bridges, along with the Republican National Chairman Guy Gabrielson. During the 1950s, this would have been one of the main sources of propaganda opposing McCarthyism and the hunt for communists. The elephant, which represents the Republican Party, is reluctant to support an idea that seems so radical, while Wherry, Taft, Bridges, and Gabrielson attempt to force it to support the insane idea that the U.S. government has been infiltrated with communists. One of the most prominent government committees involved in anti-communist crusades is the House Un-American Activist Committee. In the 1950s, it played an active role in locating communists. The hearing of communists that they produced were intended to show the U.S. that communism was thriving. During this time period, the HUAC investigated countless writers, directors, actors, liberal college professors, and even federal employees.
Fear grips the country. Not only fear of communist infiltration, but fear of being suspected of communist leanings. It is a climate that makes possible the rise of Joseph McCarthy, first-term senator from Wisconsin.
Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
What we call McCarthyism is really political slander, and it didn't begin with McCarthy. He did not invent it. There are lots of traditions in American history where people accuse another party of being treasonous.
I get the impression that while you are quite an actor, you play for a laugh. I don't think you have any conception of the danger of the Communist Party.
Until this moment, Senator, I think I never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness.
It's an interesting psychology about why these well-born people become the targets of such wrath. And Joe McCarthy is very clear about this. There's no one he despises more than the men in striped pants born with silver spoons in their mouths. And he has in mind Alger Hiss and Dean Acheson, prominent figure in government. And ultimately, suspicion is meant to be cast on Roosevelt himself. And there's the suggestion that an effete group of elite Protestants has betrayed the country and fatally weakened it.
What McCarthyism really means is that you take a real situation of espionage and you make it murky and you use it as a political tool. Add to that the sort of ambiguous role of J. Edgar Hoover, who helped supply McCarthy with some of his information. And this works out in sort of odd ways. There is, for example, a firing of homosexuals in government service, and the reason is that people said, well, they could be blackmailed into revealing secrets because we would reveal their identity.
Even unions can be red-baited. Walter Reuther makes himself president of the union partly by purging the communists from the Union. But within a few short years, people are calling him a dangerous radical. And I've read Walter Reuther's FBI file. It's a massive thing. It's the biggest waste of government resources you ever saw, because what they do is collect any little tidbit of information that can portray Walter Reuther as a radical. He's not. He's a moderate left.
If you think yourself back to that period and try to figure out what is the right way to deal with this, it's clearly not the way McCarthy did it, to make it this public thing where if you wave a piece of paper and say, I have hundreds of names of spies in the State Department, you're trying to attack foreign policy, but you're not attacking it head on. I think that's the damage of McCarthy, is that he diverts the attention from the real issues. The real issues are the foreign policy itself.
And McCarthyism, after all, was one of the first signs of the Cold War in this country from the point of view of civil liberties. And crisis that can be Cold War is always a convenient pretext for doing things which in times of peace would not be acceptable.
In October of 1947, the APUSH began its investigation of the American movie industry on communist infiltration. In 1951, the APUSH hearing began for the Hollywood 10. These Hollywood 10 were the original 10 people that were accused of having connections to the Communist Party in the United States. They were Alva Bessie, Herbert Biberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, Ring Lardner Jr., John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Samuel Ornitz, Robert Adrian Scott, and Dalton Trumbo. These 10 people refused to cooperate with the APUSH because they all felt that these anti-communist hearings violated their civil rights, the First Amendment to the Constitution, which gave them the right to follow any political party they desired. Since each person refused trial, they each spent 1 year in prison and paid a fine of $1,000. These 10 people were prominent in speaking out against the unjust anti-communist crusades because many people that were persecuted did not speak out. This image was one of great importance to the idea of blacklisting in Hollywood. It would have been used to spread fear that Hollywood was filled with secret communists. The bottom portion of this poster is the same picture taken of the original Hollywood 10. It clearly says that Hollywood is on trial because of all those affiliated with the Communist Party. The full list of names seen in this image reached over a total of 300 actors, authors, and directors. During the era of McCarthyism, if your name was found on a list, you would have been denied work because of suspicions towards association with the Communist Party in America. Joseph McCarthy gave a speech in 1950 on communists in the U.S. State Department that helped to solidify the fears of many. McCarthy believed that we must put all our efforts into winning the Cold War. He adds that in 1944, the number of communists worldwide was less than the number of anti-totalitarians worldwide. But in 1950, the number of Soviets outnumbered those on the anti-totalitarian side. This speech was an early start to his Red Scare in his crusades of the 1950s. This image demonstrates the United States' deep hatred and fear of communism. In the background, one can clearly see the hammer and sickle, which has a distinct connection with the Soviet Union and communism. The airplanes flying in opposing directions indicate that the Cold War has turned into a full-out war. The poster also demonstrates a sense of American nationalism, which could have also served as a motivation for citizens to continue to fight for the American lifestyle, and also suggests anti-communism. Since the beginning of McCarthy's search for communists, America's fear was constantly growing. Thus, in 1954, the Communist Control Act was created. It deemed that the Communist Party of America was a part of a conspiracy to overthrow the government and the party should be banned. However, this act did not take the necessary procedures to overthrow the Communist Party of America. The creation of the Communist Control Act showed the deep terror that Americans felt for the spread of communism. This act served as an excuse for the government to harass those belonging to the Communist Party, as well as an excuse to violate people's rights. Throughout McCarthy's crusades and the Second Red Scare, many were brought to trial. Some of these cases include the 1956 trial of Sloucher versus Board of Education, the 1957 lawsuit of Yates versus United States, the trial of Watkins versus United States, and the 1958 trial of Kent versus Dulles. Each of these hearings brought additional attention to the public about the issue of communism and constitutional rights. In Sloucher versus Board of Education, Sloucher was a professor in Brooklyn who had been fired for pleading the Fifth Amendment when he was questioned about prior membership in the Communist Party of America. The court ruled that it was forbidden because if everyone pleaded the Fifth, then the courts would no longer be effective. In the case of Yates versus the United States, the issue of prejudice in conviction was questioned. In this case, rulings of 14 convicted communists was reversed. In the court case of Watkins versus the United States, the issue of the APUSH's power to convict uncooperative witnesses came up. In this case, Justice Warren said that having someone speak by force about their personal beliefs is a measure of government interference and is unorthodox. The 1958 case concerning Kent versus Dulles involved the Supreme Court stopping the State Department from the authority to revoke or refuse someone a passport solely based on their communist beliefs. Each of these court cases helped to further spread the fear of communism in the United States, but also proved that many of McCarthy's supposed communists were nothing more than false accusations. Throughout the 1950s, McCarthy led crusades to eradicate the alleged communists of the United States. He used propaganda seen in political cartoons and speeches to try to make Americans fear communism, and believe that if we did not intervene, then the Soviets would eventually take over the United States. In the end, McCarthyism captured no actual communists in the United States, and was only an overglorified witch hunt that captured no proven members of the Communist Party. Overall, McCarthy and the Second Red Scare only brought fear and paranoia to the public.